Hey, my name is Frederick. In this video, I will explain what CE marking really is and how you as a importer, exporter, or manufacturer can, well, implement CE compliance in real life. So before we dig into this, just want to mention that CE is specifically for the EU. So if you plan to sell in the United States or Australia, well, anywhere that's not the European Union, then you don't really have to care about CE marking. So anyhow, in this I will explain which products are covered by CE marking, list of CE marking directives, documentation requirements, labeling requirements, and also lab testing requirements, and an FAQ at the end. So, what is CE marking? Well, at its core, it's a conformity marking, it's a compliance mark. The CE mark itself, printed on a product, it signals compliance with all EU directives, well, CE directives, that apply to that specific product. Okay? Now, the specific directives and in turn the specific technical safety standards differ depending on the product type, because we see the CE mark on so many different products. Clearly, you can't apply the same regulation or safety standard or technical standard to sunglasses as you do to, say, electronics. Okay? Now, which products have to carry the CE mark? Because the thing is, if the product is not, well, listed as a CE directive, it shouldn't carry the CE mark. Okay, there's only specific categories of products that should be CE marked, and if they fall within these, well, a CE marking directive, then they have to be CE marked. So it's binary. It's 1 or 0. There's nothing in between. It's never optional. Okay. So electronics, pretty much anything with a battery, with an input voltage, anything that's powered by an AC adapter and the AC adapter itself. Anything that's electronic must carry the CE mark. The same thing for toys, eyewear, protective equipment. That's specifically gloves. Some types of workwear, machinery, which often also falls within the scope of electronics, and medical devices. Okay. So, a few examples of CE directives. I just want to make it clear, I'm not covering every single category and every single directive. This is just to briefly explain what CE is about, okay? So as you see here, we have a range of different directives that apply to different types of products. So for electronics, you have more than one. We have the low voltage directive. If that applies or not depends on the input voltage and a few other things. ROHS specifically restricts heavy metals. EMC, that's electromagnetic compatibility in electronics, and a radio equipment directive. Well, anything Wi-Fi, any device that's Wi-Fi enabled, Bluetooth, anything with radio equipment. Okay. So what's interesting here is that you can see that depending on the features, okay, depending on the components, depending on the power source of an electronic widget, different regulations apply. Okay. But something that's very common, especially when it comes to electronics and machinery and so on, is that you find that it's not just one directive that apply. It can be, well, for an electronic machine that's, I don't know, Wi-Fi enabled, probably not that rare these days. You actually have to apply with this, and also the machinery directive. Okay. Alright, toys, that's the EN71 Toys Safety Directive, and then we have the PPE directive for protective equipment, as I just mentioned. So that's covered sunglasses and other eyewear, gloves, etc., work products. So different directives apply to different products, but they all carry the same CE mark, which is what makes this quite unique. Alright, documentation requirement, and this is really the meat of the CE marking procedure, because it's not just about printing that CE marking logo. It would be really easy if that was the case. Now, the way it works is that you need to create documentation. The first thing you need is a DOC, a Declaration of Conformity. Okay, and you can Google that. I'm not going to go into detail about what the DOC is about, but essentially it's a self-issued document where you state that you hereby declare, your company hereby declares that your product SKU is conforming to, well, one or more of these directives here. Okay, that's pretty much what it's about. So you don't have to buy it. It's not a license. It's not an approval that you get from a government office. You just issue it, okay? And you show that to the customs authorities. You show it to Amazon. You show it to anyone that may need it, retailers too, for example. You need a user manual. That's mandatory. You need a technical file. I'm going to get into that in a bit. And you need a test report, okay? I'm going to cover that too in a bit. So I'm going to jump to the technical file. So the technical file is a documentation that basically proves that your product is compliant. Okay, so and I will say that this is by far the most complex part of the CE compliance process. But what it often boils down to, it really depends on the product. Okay, but a bare minimum is to have proper design drawings, a bill of materials as a component list, a list of applied EN standards, and also EU directives, because first you have the EU directive that then says these are the EN standards that the product may comply with, okay? But it should be clear which EN standards you've actually implemented or at least verified that your product is conforming to. So that's needed. Label photocopies, packaging photocopies, because labeling requirements as a CE mark itself should be present on the product, and also the packaging, and also user manual photocopies, and a risk assessment. And a risk assessment is, well, basically it's a list of things that can go wrong and what you're gonna do if it comes to that. Okay, so if you're selling power banks, well, what could go wrong? Well, they can explode. Charging cable can melt. It can happen despite your best efforts. And in that case, it should be written down somewhere what's the next action that your company will take. Okay. Different items may need to be added depending on the product. Okay, but these are the very basics at least. That's the technical file. Okay, labeling requirements, and the funny thing is, a lot of especially the small businesses, they think that it's really about printing this CE mark and then it's done. It's not really that simple, because clearly a product will not magically become compliant just because you print a logo, right? But anyhow, the CE mark is still mandatory. It has to be printed on the product, also on the packaging and the manual. Okay, for some directives, also directive-specific information, especially when it comes to machinery and medical devices and so on. But also for certain other categories, you have to print warning labels or information about the input voltage or something like that. So it really depends on the directive, because you don't have an input voltage for sunglasses, so clearly you can't have the same labeling requirements for every single product, right? Okay, lab testing. Now, what's lab testing? Well, lab testing is the only way to verify that your product is compliant, okay? Because there's a difference between a product that's made to comply with, say, the EN 71 toy safety directive or the low voltage directive, okay? These things, these directives and the EN standards, the technical standards that are associated with these directives, they have a meaning. There's a difference between a compliant and non-compliant product. So a test report essentially proves to yourself, but also, as I showed with the technical file, to the authorities, to customers, to Amazon, that your product is compliant. Okay. So how do you get a lab test report? Well, you have to book lab testing. That's the way it works. If you're importing products, you will find that you can't really get it from your supplier, so instead you actually have to book a lab test from a compliance testing company like Intertech or BV or SGS or something like that. And if you're importing, you have to pay for it. If you're a manufacturer that want to start exporting to the EU, well, of course you have to pay for it. The EU government will not cover that cost. Okay, so CE compliance process. It really boils down to these 4 steps. Okay, broadly, because in reality it's a bit more to do. But first you have to confirm which directives apply to your product, and in turn you also have to confirm which EN standards are associated with that specific directive. Okay, they provide guidelines that you can apply to your product. So if you're designing a product from scratch, then you also have to implement these directives into the product design. Okay, that could mean that, you know, if you're manufacturing or importing toys, you need to consider, for example, physical properties of the product. You have to look into regulated substances of the product and things like that. But you truly have to understand what your, so to speak, directive means for your products. Okay, you can't just say, okay, I need to comply with EN 71 and that's it. And the same thing applies if say you're importing a private label product, or you're trying to bring a product from outside the EU into the EU. Then you have to make an assessment: is this product already, like, is it compliant? Do I need to adjust something? Okay, because in step 2 you have to order product samples or make product samples if you're a factory, and you have to book third-party lab testing. Okay, the thing is that it doesn't matter if your product passed the lab test or not. You still have to pay, and you know, this could be anything from $500 to thousands of dollars, depending on the complexity of the product and the number of directives that apply to your product. Okay, so you don't really want to gamble with that. You need to. There's no accidental compliance when it comes to these things. Okay. A lot of products are being tested that don't pass these lab tests. Okay, so once that's done, you create the label files and the user manual, and in step 4 you create a DOC and a technical file. So the procedure is actually quite straightforward. And that also leads to this question: how do the authorities check if my product is compliant? Because if they didn't do anything, nobody would bother. And the truth is that it's not really black or white. Enforcement is, well, I would definitely say that authorities, national authorities in the EU, are definitely stepping up compliance enforcement. But there's still a lot of compliant products being sold into the EU, especially cross-border e-commerce. But nonetheless, I should definitely mention this because I've seen a lot of products being pulled from the market. So what they primarily do is to look at a DOC and a test report. Okay, so they can contact you, and this could be at the time that the goods enter the country, well, enter an EU country. Okay, so they can even they can request the DOC and the test report at this time. But what's far more common is that they keep track of online stores and so on, especially online stores these days, and they can request a declaration of conformity and a test report anytime, be it a month after you have imported a product into the EU or placed it on the market if you're a domestic manufacturer, or 6 months later, or maybe a year. Okay, so it's not just about passing, you know, a customs check and then, you know, the coast is clear. They can come back at any time. Okay, so that's what they look at primarily. It's actually quite rare that they go and look at the technical file. Okay, because when the authorities touch that, you know, it becomes a public document, and they understand the sensitivity of that. Okay, but yeah, the DOC and the test report is what they primarily look at. Okay, the second thing, they can actually verify your technical compliance by ordering products from your online store. Okay, and they do that all the time, like, you know, ghost purchases, and they take that to their labs and they verify if your product is compliant. They do that both for the sake of, you know, research, but also for, you know, protecting the public from non-compliant and thus unsafe products. Number 3, at the time of the goods arriving at any EU border and being imported into any EU member state, some authorities are actually working directly with the customs to pick products straight from the shipment, send it to a lab, and thus check your product before it even enters the market. That's quite rare, but it happens, and it's something that's going to be stepped up more and more in the future. But I would say that in 9 out of 10 cases that we get in our email inbox when someone is panicking and sending an email, this or that happened, I got severe compliance issues, can you help? It's about Amazon. This is a major risk. The thing is that Amazon is they're kind of a gatekeeper. Okay, they are really strict on sellers being required to provide the declaration of conformity and test reports, and sometimes, depending on the category, they also request additional documentation. Okay, and yeah, as I said, they're getting really strict. So don't try to list anything on Amazon without the right compliance documentation. They have compliance experts and know exactly what to look for, and they won't take your documents just at face value. They will check. They will cross-reference it to and make sure that your test report is authentic, valid. Right. And another thing I want to mention is that the way that governments are actually stepping up compliance enforcement these days is that rather than stepping it up themselves, they're putting more responsibility, liability on economic operators in the supply chain. And Amazon is one, they're a marketplace, okay? But not just that, you also have freight forwarders. They start to ask for compliance documentation, even fulfillment centers here in Hong Kong. So this is just getting started, It's so much easier for the authorities to just, put this into legislation and say, hey, you have to ask for the right documentation. Because then you have private enterprises that tend to be a bit more efficient than government agencies. So this is definitely not going to be relaxed. There's only one direction this will go. Okay, FAQ. So I'm also going to cover a few common questions that we get about CE compliance while I'm at it. So I'm importing products from overseas. Am I responsible for ensuring CE compliance? And yeah, you are, definitely. The EU authorities, in writing and also when you speak directly to them, they often refer to the manufacturer as the part that is responsible. Now, that's partly true if the manufacturer is based in the EU. Okay. Now, if you're importing a product with your own brand, then you are, as an importer, still legally considered as the manufacturer. Okay. So you are always responsible when you import a product with your brand based on your design, any modification. Now, when it comes to buying a product from outside the EU, with the manufacturer brand, okay, so to speak, then what they say is that then it's an overseas manufacturer that is responsible. Now, in reality, you still, as an importer of a other brand product, you still have to obtain the DOC, the test report, the technical file, which, while if we speak in importing from China, that just doesn't exist, okay? At least not now in 2019. It's extremely rare, okay? It's almost unheard of, unless we're talking really big brands like Huawei or so on. But they launch their own products. They don't work with. They go straight to market themselves. Like, they build their own distribution systems. They don't work with importers. But if you go to an average, like, medium-sized company in Shenzhen or elsewhere in the low-cost country in Asia, you're not going to find ready-made compliance documents. So in reality, you as an importer, in 100% of the cases, or close to it, have to ensure CE compliance. Okay. Now, even if they are in theory responsible, what happens is that if you import a product and something is wrong and Amazon cracks down or the authorities say, okay, you can't sell it, well, they're going to be left holding the bag. Still, you're going to lose the money. Okay. So who covers the lab testing cost? Well, that's also you. If you're a manufacturer, obviously you have to cover it. If you're an importer, well, you still have to cover it. It could be anything from $500 US for a product to several thousand, tens of thousands of dollars if it's something complex like medical devices, laser devices, or something like that. Okay. All right. Can I use my suppliers test report? Now, say that you're an importer, okay, and you find that they have a existing test report, well, let's say that it's in theory it can in some cases be done if it's valid for the right product, if it's, well, preferably issued, even though it's not actually required for all products, by a accredited, reputable testing company like Intertek or SGS, and if it's in the same name as the supplier. It's just that this is so rare, okay? And it's not just that, especially in electronics, for example, you have more than one directive that applies. So to find a supplier that has all the test reports sorted out is just extremely rare for that specific product, okay? So in theory, yeah, but it's just so rare. One thing you should never do is to just go to the supplier, ask, hey, do you have a test report, get some PDF, and just, assume that, oh, well, they said I have a test report, I guess I got it covered, because there's so many cases of importers that I guess, it's like the X-Files. You want to believe, right? We don't want to make it more difficult than it has to be. And then, we find this Alibaba supplier, they send a test report, and we just want that to be the thing that we've been looking for. But it's always more complicated than that. Okay, how do I create label files? Well, you can use Photoshop, Adobe Illustrator, Paint, it doesn't matter. As long as you provide in your specification a photocopy of your of the CE mark, because that has to look like the CE mark. You're not allowed to make any artistic adjustments to it, anything like that. And you have to specify the position, the dimensions, which will be printed and engraving. And it should also be present in the manual and also on the packaging. Okay, but it's up to you, especially if you're importing products, and you have to create a label file to send that to your factory. Okay, CE marking is complicated. If you want assistance with implementing compliance for your product, regardless of whether you're an importer, exporter, manufacturer, go to compliancegate.com/help, and we will get back to you with a free quotation. Thank you for watching this video.